My name is Robert C. Kendrick. I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, in September the 4th, 1917. I was raised in Homer, Louisiana. That's up in North Louisiana. I went to school at Louisiana State University on a football scholarship. I was there 5 years and 3 summer schools, getting through a 4-year course. My junior year, when I went down to Louisiana State University, the trainer, Mr. Mike Chambers, asked me, did I apply for advanced ROTC? And I told him no. And the reason I didn't want to do that was because I didn't want to live in the barracks. I wanted to live in the building called G Building that all the so-called jockeystraps lived in and was treated very royally. Okay, I graduated in 1971, and I worked for the Ethical Corporation for a short time. Then since I had a reserve, I graduated in 1941. World War II come along in December the 7th, and then in January I reported to Fort McClellan, Alabama. It's probably the most ignorant second lieutenant that's ever reported in the United States Army. I went from there to the infantry school. They promoted me to first lieutenant, and I saw paratroopers there, and I decided I wanted to join the airborne so I could wear a leather jacket, wear jump boots with brass eyelets, and a little pair of wings, and a little patch on your hat. I first, when I joined their parachute troops, I was assigned to the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment up in Toccoa, Georgia, and from there we went down to the infantry school, and I got my jump wings, and the man that had talked me into joining the airborne was organized in the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment, and I went over and joined him, and I commanded C Company of the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment. We trained, went up to Fort Bragg, from there to Camp McCall, and from there we went on maneuvers in the forest there, forgotten the name of it, and from there we went to Europe. And our first action, well, first we were stationed in England, and then later on we loaded up in airplanes and went over to Tauntonville, France, unloaded, and later on we moved into the Battle of the Bulge. Our battalion moved from Tauntonville, France. We moved over into Belgium. We moved into some woods there, and we immediately had sniper fire. We was trying to dig in these little old patch of woods, fir woods, and it's like digging in a concrete street. And we got sniper fire. We cleaned them out. Then that night, about 9 o'clock, battalion commander called us in, and he told us we were going to move up some woods about 2 miles to the east. We started out, we got up there about maybe half a mile, and I was the lead company, and I was supposed to be followed by B Company, then A Company. And we were to move into these woods, and then there was vehicles, American tanks all over the place. We relieved the 11th Armored Division, our division did. They got hurt bad, and we got hurt bad also. But anyhow, we moved into these woods, and we moved in there. There were dead people everywhere, tanks everywhere, mostly American tanks, and the German army had just eaten us alive. We moved into these woods. Well, first, before we got into the woods, my executive officer told me, said, stop, nobody behind us. Well, we sat there about 15, 20 minutes. I said, oh, heck, let's go. So we moved in. We started to move into this little patch of woods, and there was some German vehicles there, and I thought they'd been knocked out. We moved into the woods. We spent the night there, and I was told at daylight to jump off and to take a little town down there about maybe a mile away. We jumped out there. First thing, we moved out of the woods to go take the town. Well, I was told by the battalion commander to take this little town. Said, when you get there, there's going to be nothing but rubble. There's going to be so much artillery fire. Just kill what's left. So I really thought that's what was going to take place. We jumped off the next morning. We didn't get 500 yards out of these woods moving towards the little town we were going to take. And the Germans, I heard a big commotion behind me. We'd spent the night with the Germans. And of course, people rounded them all up. Just about that time, we got the darndest artillery barrage from the Germans you have ever seen in your life. And I got wounded. I was talking over my radio to one of the platoon leaders. They killed my radio operator, and I got wounded through my right leg. It almost severed the big muscle up there. And my operations sergeant come up in. They gave me some morphine, and he got me to some medics. And then I was moved that night into Luxembourg, and they operated on me. Stayed there 2 or 3 days. Then I was loaded up in 48 boxcars, and we moved into Paris, France. Stayed there a while. Then we moved. I moved to the hospital in England, and I stayed there about 5 or 6 months. Oh, when I joined the 11th Airborne Division over in Sendai, Japan, I was a captain, and I was company commander of E Company. By the time the 11th Airborne was going to return to America, the regimental commander was going to stay there, and he was going to take over people coming into Korea. The Korean War was supposedly, the Korean fiasco was supposedly just about over. So the 11th was going to go home, and we were going to take the troops out of Japan and have a bunch of them up at Camp Schimmelpfennig. And they came in there, and at first I was a company commander there, then I was the operations officer. The 17th Infantry Regiment came from Korea. Well, they rejoined us there in Sendai, Japan. The 11th had gone home, and I was a captain, and I was the operations officer. We had just another understrength battalion and an understrength regimental headquarters, and in the Korean War had heated up. We moved from Sendai, Japan, down to Mount Fuji, and organized 2 other battalions, and it was called the 17th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion. My regimental commander was Colonel Herbert B. Powell, who later was promoted up through the ranks to a 4-star general. He was an outstanding leader. He looked out for his troops, and he was a fine tactician, and he took us into Korea at Inchon, and we fought, and we went all the way to the Yalu River and back. Okay, my battalion commander was a Colonel Denzel L. Baker from Mathis, Texas. One of the finest leaders, finest officers I have ever known. He saved our lives many, many, many times. He organized our battalion. He took them from there to Mount Fuji, and then the regiment was made full strength. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, we went into Inchon. We got into Inchon, unloaded there, and then our battalion, under Colonel Baker, we were sent up to help the Marines capture the city of Seoul, which we did. And then from there we went left and we started tacting, and then we joined the rest of the regiment, which had been organized into a full regiment, and then we headed for the Yalu River. No, we fought there in Japan, in Korea, and then they decided that we should go up to the Yalu River. So what we did, we went back down to Busan and loaded up on LSTs, went up to a place called Iwon up in North Korea, unloaded there, and then we moved forward and moved under Colonel Baker's command, and also General Powell, went to the Yalu River. Well, my job was an operations officer, and also I served also as a battalion exec after our battalion exec got wounded. And my duties basically was to do anything that the battalion commander wanted done. I assisted and recommended operational things, what companies should do this, that, and the other. And I was just to be sure that they were looked out for and that they didn't need anything. And basically, it was to do anything the battalion commander wanted done. Oh, my duties as the operations officer, also I helped out with any S2 duties that needed to be done. That we had contact with the regiment, and then when they had anything they wanted done, they couldn't send over the radio. I was sent back to pick it up and bring it back down to the battalion. And at times we did have an S2, but we needed what to send them one down to one of the companies or to take over one of the companies. But basically, my operations was to be the right-hand man to the battalion commander. Yeah, the regimental S2, which kept in contact with me often because we'd been old friends, he'd tell me he wanted to get, how about sending a patrol over to on the enemy side to to find out who was there, how many was there. And I'd say, Jess, we're on one side of the mountain. There's a little crest up there, and they're on the other side. If you want to come down and go over and see how many is over there, come on down. But Jess Walls was a great World War II soldier, and he was a great soldier there in Japan, in Korea. No, first the first clothing we had was just what we used there in Japan, where it was relatively warm. We got over there to Korea. We did have some combat boots, but they were cold. We had felt inserts, and you kept those on, and you'd take them out at night and put them around your waist, try to dry them out from the sweat of your feet to keep your feet from freezing. And of course, we had a lot of people that did have their feet frozen. And as we went north, the weather got colder and colder. By the time we landed at a place called Hassingen, just on the Chinese border, and it was about 40 or 50 below zero. Every man carried a sleeping bag, and if he got wounded, you put him in that sleeping bag to keep him from freezing to death. We were fed pretty well. If they couldn't get it to us by vehicle, they dropped it to us by air. We stayed there a while, and at times we would send patrols out, and we kept picking up some Chinese soldiers. We reported that back to the regiment. They said, well, no, there's no Chinaman over here in North Korea. But we found out later that that wasn't correct. Then we got word that parts of our division had been surrounded down at the Chosin Reservoir, and that we were to get out of there. They dropped a message to us and told us that they wanted us to walk over to the East Coast, and if they could find us, they'd pick us up by LSTs. Well, my battalion commander, he saved our behinds. We marched all night long and about half the next day, all through the mountains, all the way to the East Coast. Why the Chinese didn't kill every one of us, I'll never know. Because we walked the little old trails through the mountains. It was just probably a room for about 2 or 3 men together. Well, we walked through the mountains, walked all night and about half the next day, and we got over there on the East Coast, and somehow, some way, of course, we had Koreans with us. We had some engineers, people could drive trains. We found some engines, and we found some flat cars. We loaded up on those flat cars just like you'd do cordwood, and then we started down the East Coast, started down towards Wonsan. And we moved on down there, and when we got down there, we didn't have any activity at all. We were just laying up there like boxes in these flat cars. And we got down there, and then we set up a perimeter. And then we did a perimeter around Wonsan, I guess it was. And then the air got our people out of the Chosin Reservoir. They joined up with us. We loaded up with LSTs there. And then we went south to Pusan and started north again. Okay, we started north. We fought every day. When we come out of North Korea, we loaded up on the LSTs down at Hungnam. Went down and we unloaded again down at Pusan. Then we started north. And then we kept going north, ridge to ridge, all the way till we reached the 38th parallel, I guess, again. And then after we've been there about maybe a week or so, I got orders to rotate back to Japan and go back to America. As I told you before, we were sent up to Seoul to help the Marines take the city of Seoul. After that operation, we went out by a racetrack, and then we sent a patrol out on the highway north to find out if there was where the North Koreans were. Well, we got out there, and the patrol that went out there were under the executive officer. They got ambushed, and I was sent out to take over his job, and I went out there, and I was trying to find our commander of the company, commander of the unit that was out there, and Colonel Baker and his battalion showed up, and I was a real unhappy man. And then what happened was, we went to the road. The road was right down to the bottom of mountains on both sides, and the North Koreans were on both sides of the mountain. Well, the unit that was up there fighting, they had run out of ammunition, and then the battalion that had come in there, they started using ammunition, and we were getting low. So the battalion commander told me, he said, Butch, go back and get us some ammunition, man. So I went and bought a truck, and I brought it right up in the middle of the battle. And they come and got their ammunition. Of course, it really saved the day because we had to have that, and we fought that all night. I guess they thought I'd done a little because I got that truck, got in the cab, and brought it up there, and resupplied a whole battalion. And for doing that, for going back and get that truck and bring it right up in the middle of the battle, unknowns to me, I was put in for the Silver Star, which I greatly appreciated. Okay, during the Korean War, after we'd had an action there, we were up on the side of a mountain, and I got promoted to major. And from there, I stayed a major all the way through the Korean War. I was promoted to major in Korea on the side of a mountain. And after the Korean War, I made lieutenant colonel. I was at the infantry school shortly after that. Then I went to the Command General Staff College. And then from there, I spent 3 years with the CIA. And then from there, came back to the 82nd Airborne Division, commanded a battle group, commanded a brigade, and got promoted to full colonel in the 82nd Airborne Division. After that, I was sent over to Japan. I was Admiral McCain's Special Operations Officer. And I asked to go back to Korea, but I was told I'd already had a brigade in the 82nd, and that was all I was going to get. So I came back to Fort Benning, was a Special Operations Officer out at the 82nd Airborne Division. No, the Corps, 18th Airborne Corps. During the Vietnam War, I was a charter member of the... during the Vietnam War, I was a Special Operations Officer at the Military Assistant Command in Vietnam. I performed that job for 1 year. The job was to take Special Forces teams, put them out on the countryside, put them out with the mountain yards, and get them to fight on our side. When I first got there was 3 Special Forces teams there. By the time I left, we had a Special Forces group that was stationed there in Japan, commanded by a fellow by the name of George Martin, one of the finest officers in the United States Army. One time over at the Officers Club there in Sendai, Japan, a good friend of mine, Colonel Jess Walls, we were singing the song about the 509. Well, Colonel and Mrs. Powell were sitting there right by us, and in a few minutes she got up, Miss Powell got up and took a little white handkerchief and dusted off my cross rifles, said that looked like the 17th Infantry Regiment to me. And of course that song died a quick death, and we didn't sing that anymore in front of the Powells. After 30 years in the Army, I retired as a full colonel. I loved the Army. It was the greatest experience I've ever had in my life. And I've served with some of the finest men I've ever known in my life and some of the finest soldiers I've ever known.